Welcome to the UNGA BUNGA tutorial. In the following videos, we will examine all of the rules to the game UNGA BUNGA. This tutorial will be deep and comprehensive, and will go over all of the aspects of the game UNGA BUNGA. This tutorial is divided into several different sections, so you can easily skip to the parts that you need help with. Without any hesitation, let's begin. Welcome to UNGA BUNGA. Let's begin by taking a look at our objective in UNGA BUNGA. UNGA BUNGA focuses on building things in order to advance throughout the game. You begin the game as little more than an intelligent monkey. Unfortunately, this is what you are now. You will become an official caveman when you have invented your first tool. This is what you can become. Once you become a caveman, your goal is to become the ultimate caveman by obtaining all of the 6 items. Only one of you can be this awesome. The first player to have all 6 items wins the game. As we progress through this tutorial, we will learn how to make our tool, how to make all of the other items, and exactly how to play the game in each stage of our development. Before we begin to play UNGA BUNGA, we will need to separate the item cards from the playable cards. There are 36 item cards in the deck. There are 6 item cards for each player, and there are enough item cards for up to 6 players. You will then give each player one of each of the 6 item cards: tool, clothes, wheel, fire, bunga wife, and house. These cards are placed in a row, face up, in front of each player. If you are playing with less than 6 players, the remaining item cards will not be used and will go back into the item card sleeve. The item cards may be placed in any order, however it is ideal to keep the tool item card to one side, as the tool must be made first. The item cards are used to indicate how to make each item and to keep track of which items have been made. When you make an item, you will place the 2 cards required to make that item below that item card to indicate that it has been made. We will now move on to the basic gameplay in UNGA BUNGA. Now let's look at the basic gameplay in UNGA BUNGA. The playable cards are shuffled and all players will be dealt 5 cards. This will be your starting hand for the game. You may look at your cards, and you are not intended to show your opponents your cards. Once all players have been dealt in, the oldest player will go first, and the turns will go in the clockwise rotation. A player must make their first tool before any other items can be made. A tool is made by placing a smashy rock and a holdy stick below the tool item card. If we look at the symbols of the smashy rock and the holdy stick, we can see that they do indeed combine to make the tool. A player can also use an UNGA BUNGA wild card in lieu of a smashy rock or a holdy stick or both. Because the UNGA BUNGA wildcard contains the symbols of all the playable cards, it can be used as any other card. If a player cannot make a tool, they can either send a wild animal after another player or discard one of their cards and draw a new card. A more comprehensive video on wild animals will be discussed in our next section of this tutorial. Once your first tool is made, you can make any other item. The remaining items can be made in any order. Note that you only need 2 cards to make either the Bunga Wife or the clothes, but the correct pairing is required. The correct pairing for the Bunga Wife and the clothes can be found on their respective item cards. Some examples of incorrect pairing are: you cannot stop a growly beast with a clubby stick, and you cannot get a Bunga Wife with a shiny rock and some stringy shells. Cards cannot be paired together unless they satisfy one of the item card's matched sets. At the beginning of the game, once at least one player has made their first tool, any player that has not made a tool can choose to discard 4 or 5 of their cards and pick up 4 or 5 new cards in order to catch up to the other players. This move is optional, and players might choose to discard a single card or throw a wild animal at their opponent instead of discarding 4 or 5 cards. Discarding 2 or 3 cards is not allowed. Once you have made a tool, you are considered an official caveman, and you are no longer permitted to discard 4 or 5 cards. And if you intend to discard, you may only discard 1 card at a time. This concludes the basic gameplay for UNGA BUNGA. In our next section, we will take a comprehensive look at wild animals. Now let's take a look at wild animals. By the end of this video, you should be a pro at fighting monsters in UNGA BUNGA. If you send a wild animal after another player, you'll hand the other player either a bitey cat, a growly beast, or a stompy monster card. The opposing player can beat a bitey cat with either a clubby stick, a choppy stick, or a pointy stick. A growly beast can be beaten with a choppy stick or a pointy stick. A stompy monster can only be beaten with a pointy stick. UNGA BUNGA wild cards can also be used as either wild animals or as weapons. All of the different animal weapon combinations can be found on the clothes item card. To help us understand the wild animals and the weapons, let's take a different approach. There we go, we're back in our natural habitat. And we found a clubby stick. Let's go see if we can make some clothes. I think I can see something in the bushes over there. Let's take a closer look. UNGA BUNGA, that was close. It's a good thing we had our clubby stick for protection. Now we know that a clubby stick can defeat a bitey cat. I think I can see another animal over there. Let's go check it out. Well, at least we've learned a clubby stick can't stop a growly beast. Let's try something else. I think I found a choppy stick behind this tree. Maybe it'll stop a growly beast. We did it. Our choppy stick was able to defeat the growly beast. I think I saw another animal in the field over there. Let's go see if we can make clothes out of it as well. Ooh, that didn't work out very well. He looks a little confused, but oh no, he's got the thumbs up. And I think he found something. That stompy monster should be no threat to us now. Let's try that again. That stompy monster was no match for our pointy stick. Now let's just review what we've learned from our time in the field. We've seen how we compare to the size of the other wild animals in UNGA BUNGA. We've seen that the clubby stick is only effective on the bitey cat. We've seen our amazing choppy stick skills, which will be effective on a growly beast as well as a bitey cat. And we've demonstrated how the pointy stick can be thrown from a distance, making it a suitable weapon for any animal in UNGA BUNGA. In the next video, we'll look at how all of this would play out in the cards. In our last video, we got a look at the wild animals and the weapons in UNGA BUNGA, and we saw how they would interact with each other. Now let's see how this would play out using the actual cards in a normal game. Here we have a typical match laid out. We will be playing from the bottom and we'll be able to see our cards. We've made a couple of our own items, and the player on our right has also made a few items. The player on our left has not made any items at all, and the player across from us has made all the items except for clothes. Now, reading from the rules. If you send a wild animal after another player, you will hand the other player either a bitey cat, a growly beast, or a stompy monster card. In this situation, we have a growly beast, so let's give it to the player on our right. If your opponent cannot beat the wild animal, you can look at their cards and take a card of your choice, and they will have to draw a new card to maintain 5 cards in their hand. In this situation, the player on our right was not able to beat the growly beast, so they will have to show us their cards. We're going to take the card that we want, and they will have to take a 5th card from the deck. Once this play has been completed, the growly beast will go into the discard pile. This is now the end of our turn, and we're not allowed to use the card that we stole to make an item. The player on our left will go next, and they have chosen to throw a bitey cat at the player on our right. This time, the player on our right is able to defeat the bitey cat. From the rules, if your opponent beats the wild animal, they can use those cards to make clothes, provided that they have already made their first tool, and clothes are not their final item to make. So in this situation, the player on our right has already made their tool, and clothes are not their final thing to make. So they will use the bitey cat and the clubby stick to make their clothes. This is now the end of the player on our left's turn. As per the rules, if the wild animal is beaten, both players will draw a new card. The player across from us will now take their turn, and they're going to throw a stompy monster at the player on our left. The player on our left is going to use an UNGA BUNGA wild card to defeat the stompy monster. Because the player on our left has not made their tool yet, they will not be able to use these cards to make clothes, and these 2 cards will go back in the discard pile. Both players will take a card to replace the one that they used, and the player to the right of us will now take their turn. The player to the right of us is first going to make fire. Then they are going to throw a stompy monster at us. When making items and throwing monsters at another player, you must remember to make the item first before you throw the monster, like the player to the right of us did. We now have to defeat the stompy monster that the player to the right of us had given us. We do not have a pointy stick or a wild card, so we cannot defeat the stompy monster. The player to the right of us now gets to look at our cards and take whichever card they want, and we will have to draw a new card to replace the one that they stole. The stompy monster will be placed in the discard pile, and the player to the right of us will take the 2 cards that they need to replace the ones they used to make fire. It's now our turn again, and from the rules, Players may also make clothes by pairing the appropriate wild animal with a suitable weapon from the cards in their hand. With the cards in our hand, we have a bitey cat and a clubby stick. So with those two cards, we can make clothes. We cannot make any other play with the remaining 3 cards in our hands, so we'll just draw 2 more cards to replace the ones we used. Drawing cards from either the deck or another player signifies the end of your turn, so the player to the left of us will now make their move. The player to the left of us is going to use a Stompy monster and give it to the player across from us. And the player across from us is going to use a pointy stick to defeat the Stompy monster. Although the player across from us was able to defeat the Stompy monster, they are not allowed to use those cards to make clothes because they must use their own 2 cards to make clothes if clothes are their last item to make. So these 2 cards will go into the discard pile and both players will draw a new card. That concludes the section on wild animals. We will now move into making items. Now let's take a look at making items. On your turn, you can use the cards in your hand to make the 6 items. The cards required to make an item will have the card symbol and the item card color in the top left corner. In the example shown, the rolly stick and the rolly rock make the wheel because they're both blue in the left hand corner and they're the correct symbols for the wheel. Cards with 2 colors in the top left corner can be used to make 2 different items. In this case, the rolly stick is both blue and yellow. Because it's blue, it can pair with the rolly rock to make the wheel, as just shown. But it's also yellow, which means it can pair with the choppy stick to make the house. We'll now go through all of the potential card combinations. If you're feeling comfortable with how to make an item, you could probably skip to the next video. Otherwise, stick around and we'll see how to make each different item. Now let's go through and make each different card combination. It might seem like there's a lot of cards in this deck, but I assure you that once you know how to make each item, you'll become the ultimate caveman in no time. So let's go through it. We've seen the item cards before and we know a little bit about them, but let's break it down a little deeper and figure out exactly which cards will make which items. Let's start out with our tool. The tool's not only very easy to make, it's also very important, because it's the first item that we have to make in order to become an official caveman. In order to make a tool, we will have to pair a holdy stick and a smashy rock. We can see that they're both single colored green and cannot be used to make anything else. So together, they will pair and make our tool. Now's a good time to bring up placing your cards on top of your item card. If you're new to the game, you might want to keep your cards lower so that you can continue to see how to make each item. Also, if you have a smaller table, you might want to keep them higher to conserve space. For the sake of this example, we'll just keep them towards the bottom. Before we move on from the tool, let's take a quick look at the UNGA BUNGA wildcard and how we would use it to make our items. The UNGA BUNGA wildcard can be used as any other item, so in this example, we could use it as a holdy stick, or we could use it as a smashy rock, or we could even just use 2 UNGA BUNGA wildcards. All 3 of those combinations will make a tool. Any of the 6 items can be made by pairing 2 UNGA BUNGA wildcards together. Next, let's make our fire. Fire is similar to the tool because it can only be made with 2 cards, and the cards that make fire are single color cards and cannot make anything else. They'll be the sparky rocks and the skinny sticks, and they're both orange. We've seen the wheel and the house on the previous video, but we'll go over them one more time just so that there's no question on how to make either one. On the previous video, we saw that the rolly rock and the rolly stick make the wheel. We see that the rolly rock is blue and the rolly stick is blue and yellow, and both of the symbols match the symbols on the wheel. We also saw that the rolly stick makes the house when paired with the choppy stick. The rolly stick is blue and yellow, and the choppy stick is yellow and red. We also see that the symbols on the rolly stick and the choppy stick match the symbols required to make the house. So with the rolly stick and the choppy stick, we can make our house. We also see that the choppy stick is red, which is the color for clothes. And later on we'll see how the choppy stick can be used to make clothes. Now let's take a look at the Bunga wife. We'll tell right away that it's slightly different than the ones we've worked with before because there's 3 combinations rather than just 1. We don't have to worry though because we only need 2 cards to obtain the Bunga wife. We can see that all 3 combinations have the stone heart, which we'll find on the UNGA card. So to obtain the Bunga wife, we will have to pair the UNGA card with either the shiny rock, or the UNGA card with the stringy shells, or the UNGA card with the clubby stick. What we cannot do is pair the shiny rock with the stringy shells, the shiny rock with the clubby stick, or the stringy shells with the clubby stick. The most important thing to remember when obtaining the Bunga wife is that you will always need the stone heart. Now let's take a look at clothes. We'll primarily look at just the different card combinations that are able to make clothes, because we've gone through the detailed explanation on wild animals on an earlier video. Now let's take a look at the different combinations we can use to make clothes. We know that there's 3 wild animals and there's 3 weapons. The wild animals are the bitey cat, the growly beast, and the stompy monster, and they are indicated by the skull in the top left corner of their card. We also have the 3 weapons, the clubby stick, the choppy stick, and the pointy stick, also indicated in the top left corner of their card. If we look at the clothes card, we can see at the top that bitey cat can pair with the clubby stick, the choppy stick, and the pointy stick. If we look at the growly beast skull, we can see that he only pairs with the choppy stick and the pointy stick. And if we look at the bottom, we can see that the stompy monster only pairs with the pointy stick. These are the 6 combinations that we can use to make clothes. We've completed this section now, and those were all of the potential card combinations that you could make in this game, aside from the ones that you would get using the UNGA BUNGA wildcards. Next we'll look at how you would play a typical hand. Now that we've learned how to make items and have gone through all of the potential card combinations in the game, let's finish off the section on making items and go through how you would play a typical hand. Players can make 1 or 2 items each turn, and or send 1 wild animal after another player. Any items you intend to make must be made before you send a wild animal after another player. Now let's take a look at our example and we can see exactly how to play a hand. If you begin your turn with a hand like this, you could use the 2 green cards to make a tool. You could also use the 2 yellow cards to make a house. You could then choose to give another player the Stompy Monster card. If the other player cannot beat the Stompy Monster, you will take 1 of their cards and 4 cards from the deck. If the other player beats the Stompy Monster, you will take 5 cards from the deck. In either situation, the opposing player will take 1 card from the deck to replace their missing card. At the end of every turn, all players should have 5 cards in their hand. Cards are only drawn from the deck once your turn is over to maintain 5 cards in your hand. You can make multiples of the same items, but when making items that you've already made, the cards will be placed in the discard pile. This is done so that the cards used to make doubles are still in active play in the event that the discard pile needs to be shuffled and put back into circulation. Discarding one card and drawing a new card is only done if no other play is made. This concludes the section on making items. In the next section, we'll look at declaring Unga Bunga. We'll now take a look at declaring Unga Bunga. In order to become the ultimate caveman, you will have to declare Unga Bunga, and in this video we're going to learn exactly how to do that. When a player has the cards that they need to make their final item, they must declare Unga Bunga and allow each opposing player one turn before they can win the game. Let's take a look at our example. Here we see this player only needs to make a wheel to win the game, and they have the two cards that they need to make the wheel. This player can now declare Unga Bunga.
Unga Bunga!
When a player has made 5 out of 6 items, they are allowed a few seconds at the end of their turn as a common courtesy to review their cards and decide if they want to declare Unga Bunga. This window is provided to players who have made 5 out of 6 items because the ideal time to declare Unga Bunga is at the end of your turn. We will see why it's best to wait until the end of your turn to declare Unga Bunga as we play through this hand. When a player declares Unga Bunga, the other players can continue to make their own items and can also declare Unga Bunga, but they should also send wild animals after the player that has declared Unga Bunga in order to steal the cards that their opponent needs to win. We will now play through this hand as the bottom player. We have already declared Unga Bunga. It is the end of our turn and the player on our left will go next. We'll be able to see our cards, but we won't be able to see our opponent's cards. The player on our left has made their house, and they have also thrown a bitey cat at us in order to stop us from winning the game. We have no choice but to use our pointy stick to defeat the bitey cat. Those cards will go into the discard pile, and we will each take a new card. The player across from us will now go, and they have made their wheel, and they have also sent a growly beast after us. We no longer have any weapons, so we cannot defeat the growly beast, so we will have to show the player across from us our cards, and they will take the card that they want. They will also take 2 cards from the deck to replace the ones that they used to make their wheel. The growly beast will go into the discard pile, and we will take 1 card to replace the ones that they stole from us. The player across from us has now finished their turn, and because they have 5 out of 6 items made, they are permitted a few seconds at the end of their turn to review their cards and decide if they are going to declare Unga Bunga. They've decided not to declare Unga Bunga, and the player to the right of us will now make their turn. The player to the right of us is going to make their fire. They are also going to make their house. And lastly, they are going to throw a stompy monster at us. We will have no choice but to use an Unga Bunga wild card to defeat the stompy monster. Both of these cards will go into the discard pile. The player to the right of us will take 5 new cards, and we will take 1 new card. Their turn is now over, and because they have made 5 items, they are allowed a few seconds to look at their cards and decide if they are going to declare Unga Bunga. They have decided not to, and it is now our turn. At the end of our last turn, we had declared Unga Bunga, and now each player has had 1 turn, but we no longer have our rolly stick to make our wheel. So, from the rules, if you have declared Unga Bunga and you cannot make your final item after each player has had 1 turn, your declaration of Unga Bunga becomes invalid, and you must wait at least one turn before you can declare Unga Bunga again. With the cards that we have, we will make another tool, and those cards will go into the discard pile. We will also use our Growly Beast and give it to the player across from us. The player across from us is unable to defeat our Growly Beast, and now must show us their cards, and we are going to take the card that we want. We will also take 2 cards from the deck to replace the ones we used to make our tool, and the player across from us will take 1 card to replace the one we stole from them. The Growly Beast will go into the discard pile, and although we do have the cards that we need to make our wheel, we will not be allowed to declare Unga Bunga again until our next turn.
Unga Bunga!
The player across from us has declared Unga Bunga, but they have done so prematurely. Although their declaration of Unga Bunga is valid, they will not be able to make their final item until all players have had at least 1 turn. So on their next turn, they will not be able to make their house and will have to make some other play. The player on our left will now take their turn, and they are going to make another wheel, and they are also going to send a Bitey Cat after the player across from us. The player across from us will use an Unga Bunga wild card to defeat the Bitey Cat. These cards will go into the discard pile, and both players will take their new cards.
Unga Bunga!
With a surprise move, the player on our left has declared Unga Bunga with 2 items left to make. This is a valid move provided that they have the 4 cards that they need to make both of their remaining items. The player across from us will now take their turn, and although they have declared Unga Bunga, they will not be able to make their final item because not all players have had a chance to throw monsters at them. So they will just discard a shiny rock and take a new card. The player on our right will now take their turn, and although 2 players have declared Unga Bunga, they are only permitted to throw 1 wild animal. So their best course of action is to throw a wild animal at the player on our left, which they will do so by throwing a Stompy Monster. The player on our left is going to defeat the Stompy Monster with a pointy stick, and they are going to use those cards to make clothes. Both players will take a new card, and it is now our turn. On our last turn, we failed to make our final item after declaring Unga Bunga, which prevented us from declaring Unga Bunga until this turn. So we will not be able to make our wheel this turn, but we will be able to declare Unga Bunga this turn. So for now, we will have to throw our Stompy Monster at the player on our left. The player on our left is going to use an Unga Bunga wild card to defeat our Stompy Monster. Those cards will go into the discard pile, we will each take our new card, and we will declare Unga Bunga.
Unga Bunga!
The player on our left will now take their turn, and from the rules, if you have declared Unga Bunga and you can make your final item after each player has had 1 turn, you become the ultimate caveman and you win the game. In this scenario, by being the first player to make all 6 items, the player on our left has won the game and become the ultimate caveman. This concludes the final section of the Unga Bunga rules, and we hope that now you fully understand how to play the game Unga Bunga. In our next video, we will review the frequently asked questions about Unga Bunga so that nobody gets left behind. We will now address some of the frequently asked questions about the rules to Unga Bunga. One question we hear often is, can I make items after I have drawn new cards? The answer is no. You are only permitted to use the 5 cards that you started with at the beginning of your turn. Once you draw a new card from either the deck or from another player's hand, your turn is over. This leads us to another question we often get. Can I throw more than one wild animal per turn? The answer is no. Because the act of sending a wild animal after one of your opponents inherently results in you either stealing one of their cards or drawing a new card from the deck, that action signifies the end of your turn. This also prevents players from throwing a wild animal and stealing a wild animal, and throwing another wild animal and stealing another wild animal forever until there are no longer any wild animals left in the game. Another question we often get is, can a player declare Unga Bunga with 2 items left to make? Although it is uncommon, the answer is yes, provided that a player has the 4 cards that they need to make their final 2 items on their next turn. They can declare Unga Bunga. With regards to declaring Unga Bunga, we are often asked, can a player declare Unga Bunga when it is not their turn? Yes, players may declare Unga Bunga when it is not their turn. However, this is not recommended because you must allow each opponent one opportunity to throw wild animals at you after you have declared Unga Bunga before you can make your final item and win the game. If you have declared Unga Bunga when it is not your turn, at least one player will get 2 opportunities to throw wild animals at you before you can make your final item. A couple questions that we hear often are, can I take cards from the discard pile? And can I replace the wild cards that I've used to make items later on? The answer to both of these questions is no. All of the cards that have been used, whether to make items or discarded, are no longer in active play and cannot be taken off of the table. This is why it's important that when you make doubles of the same items, the doubles are placed into the discard pile, so in the event the draw pile is exhausted and you have to reshuffle the discard pile, it has enough items in it to finish the game. One question we occasionally get is, can I use a choppy stick as a tool? The answer to this is no. Although the choppy stick and the tool are similar in appearance, the tool is a very rudimentary construction, and the choppy stick is much more advanced. To make a tool, you are going to need a holdy stick and a smashy rock. A choppy stick will not work. A question we've been asked before is, can I throw wild animals at any other player? And the answer is yes. You do not have to throw wild animals at the player directly next to you, and you can throw wild animals at any player you wish. Another question we often get is, can I make clothes from my own wild animal? And the answer is yes. Provided you have a weapon that is sufficient enough to defeat your wild animal, you can pair those two cards to make clothes. Another question we sometimes get is, can I throw wild animals after my opponents if I don't have a tool or if they don't have a tool? And the answer is yes. You can send a wild animal after your opponent if you don't have a tool, and they can defeat the wild animal if they don't have a tool. The only thing they cannot do is use those cards to make clothes if they haven't made their first tool yet. Those cards will have to go into the discard pile. We are often asked about the specifics regarding dropping 4 or 5 cards in order to catch up to the other players. Some people ask, when am I allowed to discard 4 or 5 cards? You may only discard 4 or 5 cards if at least one other player has made a tool and you have not yet made your tool. We are often asked, after I drop 4 or 5 cards, can I still make a play? And the answer is no. After you have dropped 4 or 5 cards and picked up 4 or 5 new cards, your turn is over. People often ask, can I discard 2 or 3 cards rather than 4 or 5? And the answer is no. Discarding 4 or 5 cards plays into the game strategy, where players must choose whether or not they are willing to sacrifice the cards in their hand in the hopes of obtaining better cards. This concludes the frequently asked questions section of the UNGA BUNGA tutorial. We hope that you now have a full understanding on how to play the game UNGA BUNGA. If you have any further questions, you can email us at info@hkogames.ca, and our team will be happy to reach out to you and solve any questions that you have. Thank you for watching this tutorial, and we hope that you enjoy playing UNGA BUNGA.